A 37-year-old engineer once told me he felt financially successful until he ran the retirement calculator. Then reality hit. Despite earning six figures for years, he was tracking toward running out of money by age 74. He asked what went wrong. Nothing dramatic. No gambling addiction or catastrophic business failure. Just a series of ordinary decisions that seemed completely reasonable at the time. Most men don't realize they're making wealth-destroying mistakes until the damage is irreversible. The errors happen slowly, disguised as normal life choices. By the time the consequences become visible, the mathematical reality is locked in. After 35, 3 specific mistakes drain more wealth than everything else combined. They're not obvious. Nobody sits you down and explains them. Your colleagues make the same errors, so they look like standard operating procedure. Here's what makes these mistakes so dangerous. They don't feel like mistakes when you're making them. The house upgrade feels like a reward you've earned. The vehicle purchase feels appropriate for your position. The lifestyle expansion feels like finally living the life you've worked toward. Each decision seems isolated and manageable. What you can't see is how they interact and compound over decades. A choice at 38 doesn't just affect 38. It affects 48, 58, and 68 in ways that aren't apparent until it's too late to change course. Let me show you exactly what happens and why the window for correction is shorter than you think. The first mistake involves something you probably adjusted within the last 5 years without recognizing its true cost. Consider 2 men, both 36, both earning $95,000 annually. One makes a housing decision in March, the other makes a different housing decision in April. Fast forward to age 65. The March decision leads to $1.1 million in retirement assets. The April decision leads to $340,000. Same income, same investment returns, radically different outcomes. The difference isn't the house itself. It's understanding what you're actually purchasing when you sign that mortgage document. You think you're buying square footage and granite countertops. What you're really buying is a specific version of your future, though you won't see which version for another 30 years. The housing mistake appears first because it's the biggest wealth killer, but it connects directly to mistake number 2, which almost nobody recognizes until the damage is done. Mistake number 2 destroys wealth through vehicles, but not in the way most financial advice suggests. The standard guidance says buy used, avoid luxury brands, drive cars longer. That's incomplete. The real damage comes from serial upgrading combined with financing patterns that most men fall into without thinking. At 37, your income supports a $42,000 vehicle comfortably. You finance it over 6 years. At 43, the loan is paid off. For exactly 4 months, you have no car payment. Then the vehicle needs $1,800 in repairs. Instead of paying for repairs, you trade it in and finance another $45,000 vehicle. This pattern repeats every 6 to 7 years until retirement. You're never actually building equity. You're renting progressively nicer vehicles your entire adult life. The alternative looks almost identical from the outside, same $42,000 initial purchase. But when the loan ends at 43, you keep driving it. At 47, you spend $3,200 on repairs. At 51, another $2,400. At 54, you finally replace it, paying cash from savings you accumulated during those payment-free years. This seemingly minor difference compounds to roughly $380,000 by retirement, not because the cars themselves cost dramatically different amounts, but because of what happens to the money during the years without payments. The third mistake hides inside career decisions that feel like playing it safe. Between 35 and 45, most professionals receive opportunities to increase income substantially. Different company, different industry, different role. These moves typically require discomfort, new colleagues, unfamiliar systems, lost seniority. The man who stays comfortable typically sees 2 to 3% annual raises. The man who makes 2 strategic moves during this decade often increases total compensation by 30 to 50%. That income difference, invested rather than spent, becomes $400,000 to $600,000 in additional retirement wealth. Most men think they're being responsible by staying put. They're actually choosing comfort over security. The irony is brutal. The safe choice creates future risk. The risky choice creates future safety. After 50, these patterns become nearly impossible to reverse. The mathematics stop working, which means everything depends on what you do right Now, the three mistakes I've shown you account for somewhere between $1.2 million and $2.1 million in lost retirement wealth for the average professional. Housing decisions that feel like upgrades, vehicle patterns that feel normal, career comfort that feels responsible. None of these errors announce themselves. You won't receive a notification at 45 saying you've permanently damaged your financial future. The feedback comes decades later when the damage cannot be undone. But here's what separates the outcomes. Some men reach 40 and instinctively understand that this decade determines everything. They make uncomfortable choices that their peers avoid. Smaller house than they can afford, older car than their position suggests, career moves that require starting over. Others reach 40 and reward themselves for 2 decades of work. They expand into their income. They display their success. They choose comfort. Both groups think they're making reasonable decisions. Only one group retires with actual freedom. The engineer I mentioned earlier made changes after running those numbers, sold the big house, drove his paid-off car another 4 years, took a role at a competitor for 28% more money. At 52, he's now tracking toward $1.4 million by 65. He didn't fix the problem by earning dramatically more or finding secret investments. He fixed it by stopping the wealth destruction while he still had compounding time remaining. Your window is closing faster than you realize. Every year after 40, the mathematics become less forgiving. But if you're reading this and you're not yet 50, you still have enough time to change the trajectory completely. The question is whether you'll recognize these mistakes while correction is still possible, or whether you'll see them clearly at 65, when recognition no longer matters.